When a critically injured Bigfoot was brought to my research laboratory in 1998, I never imagined that treating it would lead me to discover the most revolutionary secret in human history. What I learned about these creatures' true origin challenged everything we know about evolution, human development, and our place in the natural world. My name is Dr. Victor Hartley. I'm a 43-year-old evolutionary biologist, and this is the story that cost me my career, my reputation, and nearly my life, but gave me the truth that the world desperately needs to hear. September 14th, 1998. The date is burned into my memory because it's the day everything changed. I was working late at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute, a private facility tucked away in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, about 40 miles from Seattle. Our lab specialized in studying rare and endangered species, particularly large mammals, and I'd spent the last 15 years of my career there, rising from junior researcher to head of the evolutionary biology department. The facility was state-of-the-art, funded by a combination of government grants and private donations from conservation groups. We had everything: DNA sequencing equipment, surgical suites designed for large animals, holding areas that could accommodate bears or elk, and most importantly, discretion. Our remote location and strict confidentiality protocols made us the go-to facility for sensitive wildlife cases. I was in my office that Monday evening, reviewing genetic data from a grizzly bear population study, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Dr. Sarah Kim, our facility director.
"Victor, we have a situation,"
she said without preamble. Her voice had that tight quality that meant something serious was happening.
"I need you in the main surgical suite immediately. And Victor, clear your schedule for the next few days. You're not going to believe this."
I'd worked with Sarah for 12 years. She was brilliant, unflappable, and not given to dramatic statements. If she said I wouldn't believe something, it was worth paying attention to. "On my way," I said, already grabbing my lab coat. The walk from my office to the surgical suite took maybe 3 minutes, but it felt longer. The facility was quiet at this hour. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving just the skeleton night crew. My footsteps echoed in the hallway, and I found myself moving faster, curiosity overriding my usual measured pace. When I pushed through the doors to the surgical suite, I stopped dead in my tracks. The room was set up for major surgery, monitors beeping, AV stands ready, surgical instruments laid out on sterile trays. But it was the examination table in the center that made my breath catch. On the table lay something that shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily 8 feet long, covered in thick dark brown hair matted with blood and dirt. The limbs were proportioned wrong for any known primate. Arms that were too long, legs that were too thick. The hands alone were the size of dinner plates. And the face was simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. A heavy brow ridge, a broad flat nose, a jaw that protruded slightly, like a human face viewed through a distorted lens, or a gorilla's face with unsettling human features. Is that... I couldn't finish the sentence. My scientific training was at war with my eyes. "A Bigfoot," Sarah said quietly, standing on the other side of the examination table. Beside her was Dr. Marcus Webb, our head veterinarian, and 2 veterinary technicians I recognized, Jennifer Ortiz and Kyle Patterson. All of them looked as stunned as I felt. "That's impossible," I said automatically. "Bigfoot doesn't exist. It's a myth, a cultural legend. There's no scientific evidence." "There is now," Marcus interrupted, gesturing at the table. "Whatever this is, it's real, it's alive, and it's badly injured." I moved closer, my scientist's brain finally catching up to the situation. "Where did it come from?" "Highway 2 near Stevens Pass," Sarah explained. "A logging truck hit it this morning. The driver called it in as a bear accident. But when state wildlife officers arrived, they realized it wasn't a bear. They brought it here because we have the facilities and the discretion to handle something this unusual." I walked around the examination table, observing details. The creature was unconscious, breathing laboriously. I could see extensive injuries, lacerations across the torso, what looked like a fractured leg, possible internal damage. Blood had been drawn, bags hanging from IV stands keeping it stabilized. "You've already started treatment," I observed. "Had to," Marcus said. "It was going into shock. We've stabilized it, but Victor, we need to know what we're dealing with. Is this a known species? Some kind of mutated bear? A gorilla that escaped from somewhere? We need your expertise. I pulled on gloves and began a closer examination. My hands were steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. 15 years of scientific training took over. The hair was coarse, thicker than human hair, but finer than gorilla fur. The skin beneath, where I could see it around the injuries, was dark, but not as dark as a gorilla's. The musculature was incredibly developed. This creature had to be phenomenally strong. "Can I take samples?" I asked Sarah. "That's why I called you." "We need a full workup, DNA analysis, tissue samples, blood work, everything." I spent the next hour taking samples while Marcus and his team worked on treating the injuries, hair samples, skin biopsies, blood draws. The creature remained unconscious throughout, sedated to keep it calm and pain-free while we worked. As I collected samples, I couldn't stop thinking about the implications. If this was really an unknown species of great ape in North America, it would revolutionize everything we knew about primate evolution, biogeography, and cryptozoology. This wasn't just a new species, this was potentially the most significant biological discovery in a century. "I need to run these samples immediately," I said when I'd collected everything I needed. "We need to know what we're looking at genetically." "Agreed," Sarah said. "But Victor, this stays completely confidential until we understand what we have. No papers, no announcements, no leaks. If word gets out that we have a live Bigfoot here, we'll be overrun with media, cryptozoologists, and every crackpot with a theory." I nodded. Scientific discretion was something I understood. Just us? For now, I've sworn the others to secrecy. We'll need more help eventually, but for the initial analysis, I want our core team only. I took my samples to the genetics lab, a room I'd spent countless hours in over the years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was analyzing something that could rewrite textbooks. The DNA extraction process took several hours. I worked methodically, following protocols I'd performed hundreds of times. But my hands were shaking slightly as I loaded the samples into the sequencer. This was it. This would tell us what we were really dealing with. The initial sequencing results would take until morning, so I returned to the surgical suite to check on the patient. Marcus and his team had finished their immediate work. The creature was stabilized, injuries cleaned and bandaged, legs set in a cast. It was breathing easier now, the monitors showing stable vital signs. "Will it survive?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "Barring complications, yes, it's incredibly resilient. The injuries that would kill a human or even a bear, this thing is handling remarkably well. Whatever it is, it's tough." I pulled up a chair beside the examination table, staring at the creature. In repose, with its eyes closed and breathing steadily, it looked almost peaceful, almost human. "Has it regained consciousness at all?" I asked. "Briefly, when we first brought it in," Jennifer said. She was a young tech, maybe 26, but competent and unflappable. It looked right at me and Victor. There was intelligence there, not animal intelligence, something more. Did it try to communicate? No, just looked at me for a few seconds. Then Marcus sedated it fully for the surgery, but I swear it understood what was happening. It knew we were trying to help. I spent the rest of the night in that room, monitoring the creature, taking notes, observing everything. At some point, I dozed off in my chair. I woke to the sound of alarms. The monitors were going crazy, and the creature's eyes were open, not just open, staring directly at me with an intensity that made me freeze in my chair. Dark eyes, deeply intelligent, studying me with the same curiosity I'd been showing it. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it made a sound, low, resonant, almost like a question. "It's okay," I said softly, using the calm tone I'd use with any frightened patient. "You're safe. We're helping you. You were hit by a truck, but you're going to be okay." The creature tilted its head slightly, still watching me. Then, impossibly, it raised its uninjured arm and pointed at the cast on its leg. Then it pointed at me. The message was clear. "You did this?" "Yes," I said, my heart pounding. "We set your leg. It was broken. The cast will help it heal." The creature studied the cast for a moment, then looked back at me. And then it did something that made my scientific worldview crack wide open. It nodded, a clear, deliberate nod of understanding. This wasn't just an unknown species of ape. This was something else entirely. I immediately called for Marcus and Sarah. Within minutes, the three of us stood around the examination table, watching as the creature tracked our movements with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "It's been awake for about 5 minutes," I explained, keeping my voice low and calm. "It understands us. Watch," I pointed at the cast on its leg, then at myself. "We helped you. Fixed your leg." The creature looked at the cast, then at me, and nodded again. Sarah gasped audibly. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That level of cognitive understanding, symbolic communication, that's human-level intelligence." "Or close to it," I agreed. "Sarah, we need those DNA results. Now. Something's not adding up here." As if on cue, my pager went off. The genetics lab, the sequencing was complete. "Stay with it," I told Marcus. "Keep it calm. I'll be back as soon as I can." I practically ran to the genetics lab, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Dr. Lisa Chen, our senior geneticist, was at the computer terminal, her face pale as she stared at the screen. "Lisa, what did you find?" She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear mixed with awe. "Victor, you need to see this yourself. I've run the analysis 3 times. The results they're impossible." I moved beside her, looking at the screen. What I saw made my legs weak. I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. "This can't be right," I said. "Run it again." "I already ran it 3 times, Lisa repeated. "Victor, the results are consistent. I don't understand how, but they're consistent." The DNA analysis was clear. The creature's genome was 98.7% identical to human DNA. That was closer than chimpanzees, which shared about 96% with humans. But what made my blood run cold was the specific nature of the similarities. "Look at chromosome 2, Lisa said, pointing at the screen. "It's a fusion of 2 chromosomes, just like in humans. This is the key marker that distinguishes humans from other great apes." "But look at these sequences," I said, scrolling through the data. "These genes here, they're associated with human brain development. The FOXP2 gene involved in speech and language. The HAR1 gene linked to cerebral cortex development. This creature has human-specific genes." "Not just has them," Lisa corrected. "Look closer at the expression levels. These genes are active, Victor. Fully functional." I spent the next hour poring over the data, cross-referencing it with every primate genome in our database. The conclusion was inescapable and terrifying in its implications. "This isn't a separate species that evolved parallel to humans," I said slowly, the realization dawning. Lisa, this is human, or it was. This is a branch of the human family tree." "That's impossible," Lisa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "There's no evidence of any other human species surviving into modern times. Neanderthals died out 40,000 years ago, Denisovans even earlier." "Not all of them," I said, my mind racing. "What if some populations survived? What if they adapted to life in deep forests, became more robust, more hair-covered for cold climates? Over thousands of years, they'd look different, but genetically." I trailed off, staring at the data. Then something else caught my eye. "Lisa, look at this. These markers here, they're showing recent divergence. This isn't a species that split from humanity millions of years ago. This split happened relatively recently in evolutionary terms." "How recently?" I ran the calculations, checking them twice. "Between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans were spreading out of Africa." The implications were staggering. Bigfoot wasn't some undiscovered ape. It was human. A parallel branch of humanity that had survived, hidden in the remote forests of the world, while Homo sapiens dominated everywhere else. "We need to tell Sarah," Lisa said. "Victor, do you understand what this means? This changes everything about human evolution, about our understanding of who we are and where we came from." I printed out the results and headed back to the surgical suite, my mind reeling. Sarah was waiting outside, and I could see Marcus through the window, still monitoring the creature. "Victor? What did you find?" I handed her the printout. "You're not going to believe this." Sarah read through the data, her eyes growing wider with each page. When she looked up at me, she was pale. "This is saying it's human. A subspecies of human, yes, or perhaps more accurately, a sister species, like how Neanderthals were to Homo sapiens. But Sarah, it survived. An entire population has been living alongside us for thousands of years, and we never knew. That's impossible. We would have found remains, fossils, evidence." "Would we?" I interrupted. "They clearly avoid humans. They live in the most remote areas. And if their population is small enough, scattered enough, their remains would be incredibly rare. Plus, if they have cultural practices around their deceased." I thought about various indigenous legends of Bigfoot burial grounds, stories I'd dismissed as folklore. We might never find them. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing. "We need to go in there and try to communicate with it. If it's human, truly human, then we have a responsibility to treat it as such. Not as a specimen, but as what? A person?" "That's exactly what it is," I said. "Sarah, we're not dealing with an animal here. We're dealing with another type of human being, one that's been hiding from us for millennia." We entered the surgical suite together. The creature was still awake, its eyes following us. Marcus stepped aside, giving us space. "I'm going to try something," I said. I pulled up a chair and sat down, positioning myself at eye level with the creature, not standing over it, not in a position of dominance. As an equal. "Can you understand me?" I asked clearly. The creature watched me for a moment, then nodded. One clear, deliberate nod. My heart raced. "Do you have language? Can you speak?" It opened its mouth and a sound came out, a low vocalization that had structure, rhythm. Not random noise, but something that sounded like it could be words. But the anatomy was different, the vocal tract not shaped quite the same as a human's. The sounds were there, but not quite forming human speech. "Your vocal anatomy is different," I said, more to myself than to it. "You probably have your own language, but you can't produce our sounds." The creature made a frustrated sound, then did something remarkable. It pointed at its throat, made a sound, then shook its head. Then it pointed at its ears and nodded. Then it pointed at me and mimicked my mouth moving. "You can understand our language, but you can't speak it," I interpreted. "You're telling me you comprehend what I'm saying, but you can't respond in words." It nodded emphatically, and I saw what looked like relief in its eyes. Finally, someone understood. "Can you communicate in other ways? Gestures? Signs?" It held up its good hand and began making deliberate movements with its fingers. Not random gestures, but structured signs. It was using a form of sign language. "Sarah, get me paper and a pen," I said, never taking my eyes off the creature. When she brought them, I set them on the table within the creature's reach. "Can you write?" It looked at the paper, then at the pen, then at its bandaged hand and the cast on its leg. It made a frustrated sound. Clearly it wanted to, but couldn't with its injuries. "Okay, different approach," I said. "I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. Nod for yes, shake your head for no. Understand?" A nod. "Are there more of you? More of your kind?" A nod. "Do they live in these forests?" Another nod. "Have you been watching us, humans?" A nod and something in its eyes that might have been wariness. "Are you afraid of us?" A long pause. Then, slowly, it nodded. The weight of that simple gesture hit me hard. This being, this person, had lived their entire life in fear of my species, hiding, watching, avoiding contact at all costs. And now here it was, injured and vulnerable, in our hands. "We won't hurt you," I said softly. "I promise. We want to help. We want to understand." It studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes searching mine. Then it did something that made my throat tight. It reached out with its good hand and touched my arm. Just a brief touch, a gesture of trust. "Victor," Sarah said quietly, We need to decide what we do next. We can't keep this secret forever. The state wildlife officers know we have something unusual here, and when it's healthy enough to leave, we let it go, I said firmly, back to its people. But first, I want to learn everything I can, with its permission. I looked at the creature. Will you stay? Let us study you, learn from you, and in exchange, we'll help you heal. We'll protect your secret. It looked at each of us in turn, me, Sarah, Marcus, Lisa, who had joined us, Jennifer, and Kyle, evaluating us, deciding if it could trust us with the greatest secret in human history. Finally, it nodded. Over the next 3 days, we established a system of communication that changed everything I thought I knew about human history. Jennifer, our veterinary tech, had taken a semester of American Sign Language in college, and she became our primary interpreter. The creature, I refused to call it anymore, but didn't have a name yet, adapted remarkably quickly to using standardized signs combined with its own gestural language. On the 3rd day, I brought in a whiteboard and markers. The creature's injured arm was healing well enough that it could grip the marker, though its motor control was clearly designed for larger, more forceful movements rather than fine detail. Still, it could draw. "Can you show us where you come from?" I asked, setting up the whiteboard. It took the marker in its massive hand and began to draw. Not random marks, but a deliberate map. Mountains, valleys, rivers. It drew with surprising accuracy, and I recognized the geography, the Cascade Range, stretching from Northern California through Oregon and Washington, up into British Columbia. It tapped the marker on several locations in the most remote, mountainous areas. Then it drew simple figures, representations of its people, small groups, scattered across hundreds of miles. "How many of you are there?" I asked. It paused, thinking. Then it drew marks on the board, groups of 5 lines. It made 7 groups, then started an 8th, but stopped partway through. Roughly 37 or 38 individuals. "That's all?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with dismay. "In the entire Pacific Northwest?" The creature nodded, and there was something profoundly sad in its eyes. It drew more on the board, stick figures representing its people, then crossing them out one by one. A visual representation of population decline. "You're dying out," I said softly. "Your species is going extinct." It nodded again, then drew something else. Human figures, many of them, spreading across the board. Then it drew barriers between the humans and its people, mountains, forests, rivers. It pointed at the human figures, then made a gesture at itself and shook its head fearfully. "You've been hiding from us?" I said. "For how long?" It thought for a moment, then began drawing on the board. This time, it drew phases of the moon, then sun symbols, seasons, years. It drew so many marks that they filled the board, then gestured to indicate even more beyond what it could show. "Thousands of years," Lisa Chen breathed. "You've been hiding from humans for thousands of years." The creature nodded emphatically. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It drew human figures with spears, hunting. It drew its own people running, falling. It drew what could only be interpreted as violence, conflict, death. "We hunted you," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Early humans, when we first encountered your people, we hunted you, competed with you, drove you away." It nodded, then drew more. It showed its people retreating into the mountains, into the deepest forests, learning to hide, to avoid humans at all costs. It was showing us a history of survival through isolation. "Is that why you're so scattered?" Marcus asked. "Small groups in remote areas, avoiding any place humans might go?" Another nod. Then it drew something else. Family groups. A larger figure with smaller ones. It pointed at itself, then drew 2 smaller figures and made a cradling gesture. "You have children," I said. "A family." The creature's eyes filled with what I could only interpret as anguish. It nodded, then gestured at itself, trapped here in our facility. It made a questioning gesture. When could it go home? "Soon," I promised, "as soon as you're healed enough to travel safely. We'll take you back." Over the following days, I spent every spare moment with the creature, learning. We developed a more sophisticated communication system using a combination of signs, drawings, and yes, no questions. And what I learned was staggering. The creature's people had names for themselves, a word that roughly translated to the forest people, or the hidden ones. They had language, culture, traditions. They passed down oral histories through generations, teaching their young about the world and especially about the dangers of humans. They knew about us in incredible detail. They'd been watching us for thousands of years, learning our languages by listening from the shadows, understanding our behaviors and patterns. They knew about our cities, our technologies, our wars. They'd watched human civilization rise and spread across their ancestral territories, forcing them into smaller and smaller pockets of wilderness. "Why didn't you ever try to make contact?" I asked on the 5th day. "Why hide instead of communicating?" The creature drew on the board again. It showed early attempts at contact, its ancestors approaching human settlements, trying to trade or communicate, and it showed what happened next: fear, violence, hunting parties. It drew humans killing its people, taking bodies as trophies. Then it drew something from more recent history, the 1960s or 70s, based on the clothing it sketched on the human figures. It showed one of its people being captured, taken away. It drew what looked like a laboratory, scientists. Then it drew the figure of its person, no longer moving, dead. "Someone captured one of you," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Experimented on it, killed it." The creature nodded, its expression grim. Then it made a gesture that clearly meant, "That's why we hide. That's why we fear you." "I am so sorry," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "My species has done terrible things. But I swear to you, we're not all like that. We want to understand, not harm. We want to help." It studied me for a long moment, then placed its hand over its chest and made a gesture I'd come to recognize as trust. It was choosing to believe me. On the 6th day, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since I first saw the DNA results. "Your people and mine split apart tens of thousands of years ago," I said. "But you're so similar to us. The DNA, the intelligence, the culture. Why did we diverge? What made your ancestors become what you are, and mine become what we are?" The creature considered this, then drew on the board. 2 groups of early humans, identical. Then it drew one group in open plains, grasslands. It drew them hunting, with tools, building fires, living in groups. It pointed at me, my ancestors. Then it drew the other group in dense forests, mountains. It drew them adapting to that environment, growing larger, stronger, more hair for cold climates, learning to live in smaller family groups in territories where resources were scattered. It pointed at itself, its ancestors. "Different environments created different evolutionary pressures," I said, understanding. "My ancestors stayed in open environments, developed technology, social complexity. Yours adapted to deep forest life, became physically stronger, but remained in small, scattered groups." It nodded. Then it drew something else that made me pause. It showed both groups meeting occasionally over thousands of years, sometimes fighting, but sometimes trading, communicating. "You interbred with us," I said suddenly, "just like modern humans did with Neanderthals. There are probably genes from your people in some human populations." The creature made a gesture that seemed like affirmation. Then it pointed at certain human figures on the board and made a gesture to indicate larger or hairier. It was suggesting that some humans who were particularly tall or robust might carry genetic markers from its people. "The legends," Lisa said, who'd been watching this exchange. "All the indigenous stories about marriages between humans and forest spirits, the tales of giants in family lineages. What if those weren't myths? What if they were actual historical memories of interbreeding?" The creature nodded emphatically. Then it drew something that made me catch my breath. It showed a timeline, the past, the present, and then a question mark for the future. It pointed at its people's dwindling numbers, then at the human figures spreading everywhere. It made a gesture that clearly asked, "What happens to us now?" "I don't know," I admitted. Your population is critically small. In genetic terms, you're probably too few to survive long-term without severe inbreeding problems." The creature nodded sadly. It had already figured that out. "But maybe," I said slowly, an idea forming, "maybe we can help. If we revealed your existence to the world, we could protect your territories, prevent human encroachment, maybe even help increase your numbers through conservation efforts." The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. It shook its head frantically, making distressed vocalizations. It drew on the board with quick, harsh strokes, humans with cameras, guns, tranquilizer darts, cages, laboratories. Its people being captured, studied, imprisoned. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "Victor, we've seen what humans do to rare species. We study them, tag them, track them. We destroy their way of life in the name of protecting them." The creature drew one more image. Its people. Free in the forest. Hidden, yes. Declining, yes. But free. Then it drew them surrounded by humans, in facilities like this one. Protected perhaps, but caged. It pointed at the second image and made a gesture that clearly meant death. Not physical death, but death of their identity, their culture, their freedom. "So, we keep your secret," I said. "We protect you by not revealing you. Is that what you want?" It nodded. Then it drew something else. A few human figures separated from the rest. It pointed at us. A small group of humans who knew the truth and kept it. Guardians of the secret. "We can do that," I promised. "We'll protect your people by protecting your secret. But you have to let us help in other ways. Let us monitor your population's health, maybe provide medical care when needed. Let us be allies, not observers." The creature considered this for a long moment. Then it drew a symbol on the board, two hands clasped together, a partnership, an agreement between our species. On the morning of September 25, 1998, 11 days after the creature had been brought to our facility, Marcus declared it healthy enough to return to the wild. The leg had healed remarkably fast, another indication of the robust physiology these beings possessed. The arm was still in a splint, but it could move well enough to navigate the forest. "I want to come with you," I said to the creature as we prepared for its release. "I want to meet your family, see where you live. Learn more about your people." It looked at me with those intelligent eyes considering. Then it nodded slowly and drew on the whiteboard. It sketched a warning: steep terrain, difficult hiking, cold nights. It was telling me it wouldn't be easy. "I'm ready," I said. "I've done field work in remote locations before. I can handle it." Sarah was less enthusiastic about my plan. "Victor, we don't know what we're dealing with. What if there are more of them, and they're not friendly? What if they see you as a threat? Then our friend here will explain that I'm not," I said, gesturing at the creature. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime, Sarah. To observe an unknown human subspecies in their natural habitat, to document their culture, their way of life. I have to go." After much debate, Sarah agreed with conditions. I would carry a satellite phone, check in twice daily, and Marcus would accompany me. We would bring medical supplies in case the creature's injuries worsened, and we'd document everything we safely could. We left at dawn on September 26th, driving as far into the mountains as the roads would take us. The creature sat in the back of our van, watching the landscape pass by with what seemed like relief. It was going home. When the roads ended, we hiked. The creature led the way despite its injuries, moving through the forest with practiced ease. Marcus and I struggled to keep up, our scientific equipment and supplies weighing us down as we navigated steep slopes and dense undergrowth. We hiked for 6 hours, moving deeper into the Cascade Wilderness than any marked trail went. The creature stopped occasionally, checking landmarks: a distinctively shaped rock, a particular tree, patterns that were invisible to my eyes but clearly meaningful to it. Finally, as afternoon shadows grew long, we reached a valley so remote and hidden that I understood immediately why these beings had never been found. It was surrounded by steep ridges, accessible only through narrow passages that would be easy to miss. The valley floor was covered in old-growth forest, with a clear stream running through it. The creature stopped at the edge of the valley and made a loud carrying vocalization, a call announcing its return. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard answering calls from different parts of the valley, and slowly, figures emerged from the forest. I counted 6 of them, adults ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall, covered in hair that varied from dark brown to reddish brown. They approached cautiously, keeping their distance from Marcus and me, their attention fixed on our companion. Then 2 smaller figures burst from the trees, running toward us with unmistakable joy. Children, if I could call them that, maybe 4 and 6 feet tall. They were calling out in their language, sounds that were clearly Papa or the equivalent. The creature dropped to its knees, and the young ones threw themselves into its arms. The reunion was so human, so full of emotion, that I felt tears in my eyes. This was a father coming home to his children after they'd feared him dead. A female approached more slowly, larger than the juveniles, but smaller than our companion with lighter reddish fur. The mate, I realized. She and our friend touched foreheads, made soft vocalizations to each other. She examined his injuries, her hands gentle on the splint and cast. Then she looked at Marcus and me. Her eyes were wary, protective. She made a questioning sound to her mate. Who are these humans? Our companion gestured for us to come closer. Slowly, carefully, we approached. The other adults formed a protective circle, ready to intervene if we posed any threat. The creature began signing, supplemented by vocalizations and gestures. It was explaining what had happened. The accident, the injury, how we'd helped. It pointed at its healed leg, at the splint on its arm. It made gestures that clearly indicated healing, care, kindness. The female studied us for a long moment. Then she did something that made my throat tight. She approached me directly, her height making me crane my neck to meet her eyes. She placed one massive hand on my shoulder, not threatening, but testing, evaluating. Then she made a gesture to her mate, something like approval or acceptance. She turned to the others and vocalized something that made them relax slightly. I think she just told them, "We're okay," Marcus whispered beside me. Over the next 3 days, we were allowed to stay in the valley, observe and document what we saw. It was the most extraordinary anthropological experience of my life. The group consisted of 3 family units living in close proximity. Our companion's family, himself, his mate, and 2 offspring. An older male who appeared to be alone, possibly widowed, and a younger couple with an infant. They lived in structures that could barely be called shelters, more like carefully arranged branches and bark that provided protection from rain and wind while remaining camouflaged. They moved these shelters seasonally, following food sources and avoiding areas where humans might venture. Their material culture was minimal but sophisticated. They used stone tools, not elaborate but effective for the tasks they needed. They knew which plants were edible, which had medicinal properties. They hunted small game using traps and their considerable strength, and they fished using techniques that showed remarkable patience and skill. But what fascinated me most was their social structure and culture. They had language, complex vocalizations that carried meaning, supplemented by gestures and body language. They told stories to their young, teaching them about the world and their history. I recorded some of these sessions, though I couldn't understand the words. They had art too. On a smooth rock face in the valley, protected from weather, were drawings, pictographs that documented their history. I saw images that showed their people once living in larger groups, then being scattered by humans. I saw representations of different landscapes where their ancestors had lived, forests, mountains, even what looked like coastal areas. They used to have a much larger range, I told Marcus as we studied the pictographs. These images suggest they lived all along the Pacific coast, from California to Alaska. But human expansion pushed them into smaller and smaller territories. The older male approached while we studied the rock art. He made a gesture for us to follow and led us to another area of the valley, to a place where the ground was different, deliberately arranged stones forming slight mounds. "A cemetery," Marcus breathed. "They bury their dead." The old male confirmed this with a nod. He pointed at the graves, then at himself, making gestures that told a story. His mate was buried here, his siblings, his parents. This valley had been their territory for generations. He led us to one grave in particular, smaller than the others. He knelt beside it, touching the stones with a gentleness that transcended species. Then he looked at us and made a series of gestures. A child, his child, dead many years ago. How? I asked gently. He drew in the dirt, a human figure with a gun. Hunters, he indicated. They'd shot at him and his family. His child had been hit. They'd run, but the young one had died from the wound. "I'm so sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. He looked at me with eyes that held ancient sadness, then made a gesture that seemed to mean, "This is why we hide. This is why we fear you." That night, sitting around a small fire they'd made in a sheltered depression, I watched the three families interact. The children played, wrestling and chasing each other with sounds that were unmistakably laughter. The adults prepared food, tended the fire, communicated with each other in their complex language. They were people, different from us in appearance, adapted to a different way of life, but fundamentally people. They had families, culture, history, emotions, intelligence. They loved their children, mourned their dead, told stories, made art, and they were dying out. 37 individuals, I said to Marcus quietly. Even if we assume there are other groups we don't know about, the total population can't be more than a few hundred at most. They're functionally extinct. "What can we do?" Marcus asked. We promised not to reveal them. "I don't know," I admitted. If we tell the world, they lose their freedom. If we stay silent, they slowly disappear. Either way, we're watching the end of a people. Our companion must have heard us talking. He approached and sat down beside us. He drew in the dirt with a stick, a timeline stretching into the future. He drew his people's population getting smaller, then eventually disappearing entirely. "You know you're going extinct," I said. He nodded. Then he drew something else, a small group of humans, us. He pointed at us, then drew lines connecting us to his people. Then he drew symbols I'd come to recognize as meaning remember or tell. "You want us to remember," I said, understanding. "When you're gone, you want someone to know you existed, to tell your story." He nodded emphatically. Then he drew more, images of his people's history, their culture, their way of life. He pointed at my recording equipment, at my notebooks. He made a gesture that clearly meant, "Document everything, bear witness." "That's why you let us stay," Marcus realized. "You're not just tolerating us. You're actively choosing to share your culture with us because you know it's ending. You want someone to remember." The creature touched his chest, then pointed at his family, at the others in the valley. Then he pointed at the graves. Finally, he pointed at me and touched his chest again. The message was clear. "When we're gone, our memory will live in you." "I promise," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll document everything. I'll preserve your history, your culture, your story, and someday, when the time is right, I'll make sure the world knows. Not where you lived, not how to find you, but who you were, what you meant, that you were people, and you deserved better than what we gave you." He placed his hand on my shoulder, the same gesture his mate had made when accepting us. A gesture of trust, of understanding, of shared grief for what was being lost. That night I lay awake in my tent, listening to the sounds of the valley. I could hear the creatures settling in their shelters, the soft vocalizations between mates, the quiet sounds of children being comforted to sleep. I was bearing witness to something that shouldn't be happening. The slow, quiet extinction of an entire branch of humanity. Not through some dramatic catastrophe, but through gradual displacement, through being pushed into territories too small to sustain their population, through isolation, and the inevitable mathematics of genetic bottlenecks. And the worst part was knowing that we, Homo sapiens, were responsible. Our expansion, our dominance, our fear of anything that looked like us but wasn't quite us. We'd driven our own cousins to the brink of extinction, and most of humanity would never even know they'd existed. I woke before dawn on our fourth morning in the valley. A thin mist clung to the trees, and the air carried that deep, earthy scent only old-growth forests seemed to hold. The others were still asleep, but I could hear soft movement near the stream. I stepped out of my tent and followed the sound. Our companion, the father we had first met in the lab, was kneeling beside the water. His children slept curled against their mother a short distance away. He didn't look up as I approached, but I sensed he knew I was there. He traced his fingers along the surface of the stream, drawing swirling patterns in the water. I sat beside him silently, unsure if this was a private moment I was intruding on. After a while, he signed slowly, using the gestures we had developed together. "Time is short," I nodded. "I know." He pointed to the valley around us, then to the sky, then made a fading gesture. Their world disappearing. Then he tapped my chest, once, twice, firmly. "You must remember." "I will," I promised, "but there must be something more we can do. Some way to help." He shook his head slowly. Then he pointed toward the distant mountains, tracing a path. I understood there were other small groups scattered across the range, fewer than here, some even more remote. He couldn't tell me how many remained, only that they were dwindling. "Have you contacted them?" I asked. He hesitated, then made a gesture that meant too far, too dangerous. I understood. Crossing into human-occupied areas risked exposure. Many of their kind had already died that way. We returned to camp as the first rays of sunlight touched the ridge. The rest of the valley slowly woke. Children played. Adults stretched in the cold morning air. It was ordinary and beautiful, and deeply tragic, because I knew how fragile it all was. Marcus was boiling water for instant coffee when I walked back into camp. "You look like you didn't sleep much," he said. "I didn't," I admitted. He, made it clear. "Their time is limited." Marcus stared into the steam rising from the pot. "I'm starting to think the best we can do is exactly what we're doing. Learn. Record." Honor their story, I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Every instinct as a scientist screamed that we had to take action, intervene, protect. But as a human, as a guest in their home, I felt an equally strong obligation: do no harm, and revealing them to the world would almost certainly destroy them. At midday, the father motioned for me to follow him deeper into the forest. Marcus stayed behind with the families. The older male, quiet and solemn, joined us. We walked for nearly an hour, winding between ancient cedars and moss-covered rocks until we reached a narrow rocky cleft hidden behind a fallen trunk. The father ducked inside first. I hesitated, then followed. The passage opened into a small cavern. Faint light filtered down through cracks in the ceiling, and along the walls, painted with pigments I didn't recognize, were scenes more detailed than anything in the valley pictographs. They told a story, not of their past, but of ours. Early humans, thin and small compared to the forest people, moving across plains. Fires, tools, hunting. Then the two peoples meeting, sometimes peacefully, sometimes in conflict. The scenes showed gifts exchanged, marriages, villages shared for brief periods. Then came others, humans in greater numbers, with new tools, spears, bows, later firearms, the forest people driven into mountains, fewer and fewer. At the end of the mural were small groups scattered across vast spaces, then single figures, then nothing. A quiet prediction, extinction. I ran my hand lightly along the wall, afraid to disturb the paint. The father tapped a symbol near the final image, an outline of a human figure with a small circle painted where the heart would be. "This is," I whispered. He pointed at me, a keeper, a storyteller, a witness. I felt my throat tighten. "I don't deserve that," I said softly. He shook his head. "Not deserved, chosen." There was no arrogance in his gesture, no sense of reverence, just necessity. Someone had to carry the truth. When we exited the cave, the older male touched my arm and led me behind a cluster of rocks. There, nearly hidden under a covering of leaves and branches, was a bundle wrapped in woven fibers. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside were objects unlike anything we'd seen among them before. A carved stone tablet, intricate, deliberate. Not pictographs, but symbols. Script. My breath caught. Writing. I glanced at the father. He nodded slowly, then signed, "Old," before hiding. My mind reeled. Their ancestors had once had a written language, something they'd abandoned when forced into secrecy. This artifact had been hidden away for generations, perhaps passed from elder to elder. The stone tablet showed scenes similar to the cave drawings, early contact, cooperation, and a warning. Figures with strange symbols, resembling early human tools, approaching, conflict, flight, scattering. At the bottom was a final line of symbols arranged differently from the rest. I pointed. "What does this mean?" I asked. The father hesitated, then made a gesture he'd never used before. Both hands pressed to his chest, then extended outward, palms up. "We give this to you." I froze. "No, I can't take this. This is your history." He shook his head firmly, then he pointed back toward the cave paintings. The story of extinction, then to the stone tablet. "If we keep, all will be lost." I felt a weight settle on my shoulders, heavier than any scientific responsibility I'd ever known. "I will protect it," I said at last, "but only if you are certain." He pressed his forehead lightly to mine, a gesture I'd seen him use with his children. His answer was final. When we returned to camp, the others were waiting. Their expressions told me they understood what had happened. This wasn't just a gift. It was a transfer of guardianship. That evening, the father gathered the families around a fire. He signed a story, long, slow, rhythmic. The children listened, wide-eyed. The adults responded with murmured affirmations. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt the meaning. This was not a story for them. This was a story for me, for humanity. A father passing the torch to another father, not by blood, but by choice. When the story ended, he turned to me and signed, "Tomorrow." I nodded. Our time here was ending. Later, alone in my tent, I held the stone tablet wrapped in cloth. My hands trembled, not from fear but from awe. This was the most important artifact in the history of humankind, and no museum, no university, no government could ever know of it, not yet. Outside, the valley grew quiet. I heard the soft calls of the forest people settling for the night. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, a voice sang low and melodic. I wondered how many such nights they had left. I wondered if, someday, their songs would be heard only in memory, carried not by them, but by us. Tomorrow, we would return to the world, and nothing would ever be the same. We left the valley at dawn. The farewell was quiet, respectful. No dramatic embraces, no final speeches. That wasn't their way. They gathered near the tree line where sunlight filtered through the cedars, painting long golden shafts across the mossy ground. The children clung to their mother while the father stood beside us, calm and resolute. He placed a hand on my shoulder, then on Marcus's. A blessing, a goodbye. Then he signed one word we both understood clearly. "Remember." We bowed our heads, then turned to begin the long journey out of the mountains. The hike back felt heavier than the journey in. Every crunch of leaves under my boots reminded me we were leaving behind a world few humans had ever seen, a world that might not exist in a few decades. The forest seemed to sense the weight of our departure, each whisper of wind through the branches like a quiet lament. Marcus walked in silence, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as though expecting our companion to appear again. But we saw no one. If they were watching, they remained hidden, guardians of a secret older than our civilization. When we reached the van, I felt a pang of disbelief. The steel frame and dusty windshield looked impossibly out of place after the ancient serenity of the valley. It was as if we had stepped out of a dream and back into a world that suddenly seemed too loud, too bright, too careless. On the drive back to the research facility, neither of us spoke until we were halfway down the mountain. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "What are we going to tell them?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. The truth was impossible, and yet hiding everything felt like betrayal. We'll tell them we found evidence of a small, undocumented primate species, I said slowly. We'll say it appears non-threatening and should be left alone. No samples, no remains. Nothing to study further. Marcus nodded, though I could tell the lie sat as poorly with him as it did with me. We arrived back at the facility shortly after midday. Sarah and Lisa met us in the loading bay, their expressions a mix of relief and anxiety. "Where is he?" Sarah asked. "Home," I said simply. "He's safe." They exchanged a look, not disappointment exactly, but something close to frustration. They had been hoping to continue learning, I knew, but they also understood the promise we had made. Sarah ushered us into the conference room. "Tell us everything." So we did, carefully. We described the valley, the family structure, the culture, the cave paintings. We explained the small population and the dangers they faced. We provided just enough detail to convey the seriousness of their situation, but omitted anything that might lead others to them. I felt the weight of the stone tablet tucked safely in my backpack as I spoke. I didn't reveal it, not yet. Even within our trusted circle, the fewer who knew, the safer the tablet would be. When we finished, the room was silent. "So they really are," Lisa began. "Yes," I said. "A sister species. Human." Sarah took a slow breath. "Victor, what do we do with this information?" The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. "We do nothing," I said. "We protect them by protecting their silence. No publications, no press, no announcements. We lock the records. Only those in this room, plus Jennifer and Kyle, know the full truth. And no one says a word unless every one of us agrees." Marcus nodded. "Lisa, too." After a moment, Sarah agreed. "We keep the circle small." For a few weeks, that fragile peace held. We returned to routine tasks, habitat studies, genetic work, conservation projects. But something had shifted inside me. Every time I looked at the trees outside my office window, I imagined the father and his family. I wondered what stories they were telling their children. I wondered if they still felt safe. Then, in early October, everything changed. It began with a phone call from a state wildlife officer, the same officer who had originally brought the injured father to us. "I need to speak to Dr. Hartley," he said. His voice was tense. "This is Hartley. We've received reports of sightings. Unusual animals. Near Stevens Pass, I felt my pulse spike." "Where exactly?" He gave a location roughly 20 miles from the valley. "Could just be bears," he added, "but the descriptions, well, I thought you'd want to know." I thanked him and hung up, then called Marcus and Sarah. Within an hour, the three of us were in the van, heading toward the reported area. When we arrived, my worst fears were confirmed. Truck tracks cut through the brush, deep grooves made by heavy tires. There were footprints too, large, familiar, forest people. But there were other signs as well. Broken branches, disturbed soil, signs of struggle, but no blood, and boot prints, many of them. "Someone else has been here," Marcus whispered. We followed the tracks for nearly a mile before the trail vanished at a rocky outcrop. Beyond it, the land sloped into dense forest, impossible to track without dogs or specialized gear. "Could they have been taken?" Sarah asked quietly. "I don't know," I said, but dread coiled in my stomach. The father had told us other groups lived farther out, more isolated, more vulnerable. Someone must have stumbled across one. As we stood in that silent clearing, I felt something I had never felt before: helplessness. We had promised to protect them, but protection meant invisibility, and invisibility meant we couldn't intervene without exposing them. We returned to the facility, unsettled. For weeks I waited for more news. Reports came sporadically. Strange sounds in the forest, glimpses of tall shapes moving at night. Nothing concrete, nothing actionable, just whispers. The months passed. Winter settled over the mountains. Snow sealed the valley behind a shimmering wall of white. Access became impossible. I waited. Spring came, the snows melted, and at the first opportunity, I returned to the valley, alone. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't bring Marcus. I needed to see for myself. I hiked 2 days through terrain rougher than I remembered. When I finally reached the valley, my heart sank. It was empty, no shelters, no fires, no signs of recent habitation, just silence. I searched for 2 days, no footprints, no tools, no traces except the carefully maintained graves, untouched and still honored. The forest people were gone. I don't know whether they left voluntarily, moving deeper into the mountains, or whether they were forced to flee. Perhaps they sensed danger long before we did. Perhaps they had known all along their time here was limited. Before I left, I returned to the cave. The paintings remained, but another image had been added. A figure, tall, human, holding a stone tablet, a single tear falling from its eye. I touched the fresh pigment with shaking fingers. They had known I would return, and they had left me a message, a farewell. I stood there for a long time, in the quiet heart of the mountain, and let myself grieve, not just for the friend I had made, not just for his family, but for the entire branch of our shared humanity disappearing into shadow. Somewhere out there, they may still be alive, hidden, watching, waiting for the world to change, or for memory to fade. I returned to civilization carrying the tablet and my notes. I sealed away everything, photographs, sketches, recordings, in a climate-controlled archive. I made copies, hid them in secure places. If something happened to me, the record would survive, but the truth would remain silent until the world was ready. Their story deserved nothing less. So now I tell it carefully, quietly, with the same promise I made beside a forest fire in a hidden valley, to remember, to honor, to protect, because some truths are too important to reveal and too sacred to forget.